in some way, they stand as proofs that there are things that stand just out of our reach. So, for instance, I was also thinking of the example of Ambrose, who um, read without using his voice or moving his lips. And so St. Augustine had never seen somebody read without reciting, without speaking out loud. St. Augustine, who was from a wealthy family, who was a very sophisticated man in his time, um, in the so-called 4th century, he had never seen anyone read the way, if one hadn't come across such an example. This example wasn't known from the Confessions of Augustine. One could easily never suspect the possibility that reading hadn't always been, and in fact wasn't for many thousands of years, something that one did except through reciting, except through speaking out loud. And in fact, the whole Roman period, the whole Greek period is under this dispensation. So in that light, I mean, when we consider, so for instance, on my Twitter feed, I put out these various sort of half thoughts. But one of them was that Jung is, as it were, like the left wing and Freud like the right wing of psychoanalysis. I think it's the reflection has some worth so far as we don't consider that Jung has come later and Freud has come earlier, which is less interesting, although true. It is true, and it's there in what's given. But if we look at the sense in which what Jung is teaching is more on the side of Bachofen, more on the side of the etheric, as Bachofen calls it. And interesting, Agamben links this Bachofen etheric to Kafka. Very interesting. And on the other hand, we have these things which are on the side of especially the sexual drive, which is often seems one of the to be viewed as the most solid drive in so in Lewis Morgan, who stands against Bachofen in the considerations of Engels and Marx, we have a pushing more towards the English view of the world. Think somehow of this analysis of toilets and Zizek somehow. And then we have this more Kafkaean and this more fairy tale world on the other side. And so how can this fairy tale world, this world of, you get this sometimes in Jordan Peterson and the analysis of Pinocchio and such things, early Disney films. It's interesting to consider the possibility of thinking of early Disney films in superimposition over Kafka. Can that be thought? So, but so for instance, on the more solid part of the etheric, the idea on Dugin's side is, in contrast to a Marx or a Zizek, is that all kinds of issues came up. So, for instance, that human beings became aware of death, and then they had to give themselves explanation about death. But the etheric side of it is stepping into this strange fairy tale, etheric spirit world in the moment of reception. So, like for instance, in the Jewish tradition and the story of Cain and Abel, and this in the interpretation that runs against the more common interpretation, but is straightforwardly in the text, when God says, "Where is your brother Abel?" and Cain says, "Not, I know not," but rather he says, "I didn't know. Am I my brother's keeper?" So this coming into awareness, this strange, hazy, foggy, nebulous moment of coming into awareness that there's this ethical region that one is dwelling in, and that one is one's brother's keeper. This is very much in that kind of thinking. I think here, one of Kafka's stories, I might have mentioned it before, where there's a discussion, there's a group, and and the comment is made, if we would continue this discussion perpetually about whether this person can join the group or can't join the group, it would amount to the same thing as letting them join the group. That certain words, certain agents are able to say things which are then again and again brought up into the discussion. So, like for instance, the Anselm's proofs about God, or however they should be understood as prayer, that this should continually be discussed, and even by atheists, even if they have, or the new atheists, even by the crudest form of atheists, simply in order to ridicule it, but that certain things should continually be accepted in this sense of it amounting to the same thing as making them into canon, as it were. I think that has a deep. There's something in that we're not thinking. So that's it's very clear in a way. It's obvious in a way, but it's also deserves some more thinking. With respect to this right and left of psychoanalysis, I think that makes a good. It's almost I want to call it a metonymy, as it were, like it's a part of the world. We're mentioning a part of the whole world or being in order to speak for something that's larger than that, if the political machinations are almost the same thing as that what Heidegger is calling the beings rather than being. It's almost like the political sphere, especially you see it in Carl Schmitt, when it becomes this question of a limit case, it's grown larger in a way. I think that's a part of what Agamben is worried about, in the sense that it's easier for totalizing powers to come in because we're surrounded by habituation, which grows out of sometimes 20 years of schooling, which is a major dwelling, and the increase, of course, in every form of being not just manipulated, but self-manipulating, in the sense of always trying to fill ourselves with new understanding, always trying to access the best information, and so forth. Self-indoctrination, and just a totalizing of this self-dwelling as something which is constantly in renovation, and so forth. I think in a larger sense on this East and West, and when Goethe is saying when you have a problem, the best solution is another problem. I think this is very Western, whereas, and it says here, I can get over my problem, and how do I do it? And I must do it now. And the way to do it is with another problem. So, whereas the Eastern thinking is there's always going to be another problem, therefore don't rush. What's the big rush? You don't, why not stay with this problem for a while? Why do you have to rush? And I think this is also strangely to be contrasted with this debate between the Dasein, which is actually being held up as this sort of slaughter of Dugin, was basically the conventional sense of right wing, and then this left wing Zizek as the keeper of the subjectivity and the absolute subject of Hegel, and so forth. On another side, I always mention that I think the episode of the Lotus Eaters in in Odyssey, where Odysseus himself is saying, they don't mean us no harm, but we cannot stay here, is still very emblematic of the deep Western nature,